Biased news reporting has long been a concern in Canada, with many people questioning the impartiality and accuracy of the news they consume on a daily basis. The issue of biased news reporting is particularly relevant in today's political climate, where misinformation and fake news are prevalent and trust in the media is at an all-time low. One of the biggest concerns with biased news reporting is the lack of diversity in the newsroom. Many news organizations in Canada are owned and operated by a small group of media conglomerates, which often have their own political and economic interests. This can lead to a homogeneous perspective in news coverage, with stories being reported from a single, narrow point of view. This lack of diversity is also reflected in the makeup of newsrooms, with many lacking representation from marginalized communities. This can lead to a lack of understanding and sensitivity when reporting on issues that affect these communities, and can also lead to a lack of coverage of these issues altogether. Another concern with biased news reporting is the use of sensationalism and clickbait headlines. In a bid to attract readers and boost online traffic, many news organizations will use sensational headlines and stories to grab people's attention. This can lead to a distorted representation of the facts, and can also result in the spreading of misinformation. In addition to these issues, there are also concerns with the way that news organizations are funded. In Canada, the majority of news organizations rely on advertising revenue to survive. This can lead to a conflict of interest, with news organizations being reluctant to report on stories that may upset their advertisers. This can also lead to a lack of coverage of important stories that may not be considered sexy or clickable enough to attract advertisers. The problem with biased news reporting is not limited to traditional news outlets. Social media platforms have also played a role in spreading misinformation and fake news. Social media algorithms often prioritize sensational and controversial content, which can lead to a distorted representation of the facts. In addition, the anonymity of social media allows for the spread of misinformation and fake news with little accountability. Despite these concerns, there are steps that can be taken to combat biased news reporting in Canada. One of the most important steps is to support independent and diverse news organizations. This includes supporting local and community-based news outlets, as well as subscribing to news organizations that have a commitment to accuracy and impartiality. Another important step is to be critical and skeptical of the news we consume. This includes fact-checking information, being wary of sensational headlines and clickbait stories, and looking for multiple sources of information to get a more well-rounded view of a story. In addition, it is important to demand accountability from news organizations. This includes holding news organizations accountable for their reporting, and calling out instances of bias and misinformation. Finally, it is important to support efforts to diversify newsrooms and to ensure that marginalized communities are represented in the media. This includes supporting training and mentorship programs for journalists from marginalized communities, as well as calling for greater representation of these communities in newsrooms. Overall, biased news reporting is a serious issue in Canada, with the potential to harm democracy and undermine trust in the media. By supporting independent and diverse news organizations, being critical and skeptical of the news we consume, and demanding accountability from news organizations, we can work towards a more accurate and impartial news landscape in Canada. Bias reporting in Canada has been brought to you by HardTalk News.